Welcome back to Brad's Car Mods. I'm Brad. It's time to do a build overview of my car. Let's go. I finally decided to get off my butt because it's nice and cool this morning and finish this video. I've been wanting to do this for a while now, and as you saw at the beginning, my son and I filmed this sick drone sequence to do an opening of the video, which I'm going to keep because it was awesome. But we had all this other stuff planned for this build overview video, and I kept procrastinating because it was hot, and I kept hearing in my head this motto of mine that my buddy John and I talk about all the time, which is just don't overthink it. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to do it kind of vlog style, and I'll just come out and talk about the car. Because while it is modded, yes, there's not a ton done to it. And I just want to cover all the stuff that has been done to it, that was done to the car when I bought it, and the stuff that I've done to it since, and kind of do a build snapshot, if you will, because I've got big stuff planned for this car, and I want to just, here's the way the car sits right now, because things are going to change. And I just want to run through the list and talk about a little bit of the inspiration of why I own this car and etc. So let me turn the camera around and let's do that. All right, so what you're looking at here is my 1999 Mazda Miata. It looks slightly different than a normal 99 Miata for a couple reasons. One, I had lots of stuff done to it, so it obviously has a roll bar and some wheels and tires, and it sits lower and has a lip on the back and a lip on the front. But also, people who know what they're looking for will realize that the front end is different. Mazda kind of split the second generation up into two sub-generations. 99 and 2000 is when they made this car. 2001 through 2005, it's called an NB2, so it's kind of the facelift version of the Miata. A couple of changes though. The motor is slightly different. I'll cover that in a second. And the front end is different. And this car has the front end from one of the newer versions. And so it has the NB2 front end and headlights. And what happened was, if you look at the Carfax of this car, this was a 99, and I think in 2000 or maybe 2001, it was hit in the front end, right here in the front end. And it was enough that the insurance company totaled it. And my theory, this is an aftermarket fender. It's not the same as the OEM fender. So someone replaced that and straightened out everything, and I think put on the next generation front end. I think that front end's been on there ever since. And I've had zero issues with the car as far as, so it is a rebuilt title car, which scares some people, but for me, this is my toy. And it actually makes it less scary to modify because it's not a normally titled car. So in other words, this car has been on the road for over 20 years, and it doesn't eat tires, it doesn't do anything crazy, it tracks perfectly straight. There's nothing wrong with this car at this point, other than a couple of body panel alignment issues. But otherwise, you know, especially from a distance, it looks great. The paint's not flawless by any means. I'll stand here in front and you can see all the dings and divots and swirls and all that stuff. But you know what, like I said, it's a autocross track car, so I don't mind it at all. And I did have it polished the other day by a buddy of mine, Jerry, and it really shined up good. All right, so I just kind of want to go through this car kind of in three parts. One is the reason why I own this car, the inspiration for the car, why this particular model, etc. And then what has been done to it, like when I bought it, what was already done to it, and then what I've done to it since. All right, so I did some time in the Air Force, and I spent some time overseas, and when I was over there, I was stationed in Germany for a couple years, and a buddy of mine, this was in 2002, 2003, a buddy of mine, Mike, had an NA, a first-gen Miata, that he did like a DIY turbo kit on, and I went for a ride with him one time, and he let me drive it, and that thing blew my mind. I don't know what the actual horsepower was. I know it was over 200. I don't think he ever had it dynoed, but That's a very light car, even lighter than this car, with a turbo, and the put your butt in the seat feeling of that car was unlike anything I'd ever driven up until that point. It blew my mind. And so fast forward a couple years, when I kind of first got married, I ended up wanting to buy a fun car of my own to drive back and forth to work. And so I ended up buying, I think it was a 2000 Miata. And I never did any modifications to it or anything like that. I had a crap job at the time, couldn't afford anything. And so for me, though, the NB, the second generation Miatas, are where it's at. And even with the NDs coming out, they're good looking cars. But for me, the NB is still the one to have. For me personally, I like the body style. I like the looks. I think when you modify them like this, they really start to look good. And so this, to me, just reminds me of 90s JDM, even though this is, well, it's a 99, so it's technically 90s. But that was the beginning of these second generation. So they went into the 2000s. And but the body lines and the body style just reminds me of those 90s JDM cars. All right, so the list of things that came on the car when I got it, or the guy that had it before me installed, did a good job of sourcing components. So a lot of it, he kind of threw the parts catalog from Flyin Miata at the car, which is great because they're one of the premier sources of aftermarket parts for performance parts. And so what he had done to it was, you can see right here, most of the work was wheels and brakes and suspension. So the suspension is the Flyin Miata Stage 1 suspension kit, which included the yellow Koni Sport shocks. So not a race spec shock, but a more sporty shock than is OEM. And then upgraded springs, or uprated springs. So lowers the ride height a little bit, and also stiffer. I think they're 325-pound springs. So not terrible, but definitely more sporty than stock. And it also included a very beefy front sway bar and a rear sway bar. I have the front set to the highest setting, so the strongest setting, and I do have the rear sway bar on. Some people don't run the rear sway bar. I prefer it, and I have it on the weakest setting, but I do have it on the car. The brake setup is a Flyin Miata upgrade kit, so it's the rotors with the slots and pads and steel brake lines, and the rotors and the pads are rebranded StopTech, so they're StopTech brakes and rotors specifically made for Flyin Miata, plus the steel brake lines, and I have since put in .4 racing fluid, or high temp fluid, for track and autocross use, of course. And the brake setup on this is some of the best pedal feel I've ever felt in any car. Very stiff, very confidence building, which is what you want with your brakes. They're amazing. I've done multiple track days, 4 or 5 track days now, and lots of autocross. Never once have I had any brake fade. Obviously, this is not a higher horsepower car, and the wheels and tires, which I'll talk about in a second, are not terribly wide relative to race spec cars, if you will. And so I'm not pushing it as hard as some people are pushing these. So maybe that's why I'm not experiencing the brake fade yet. But for this setup, the brakes are phenomenal. The other thing that he put on was this Advanti Storm 2 wheel, which I've kept. It actually came with 2 sets of wheels, the Storm 1s and the Storm 2s. A lot of Miatas run the Storm 1s. They're a very popular wheel. They're light, strong, cheap, great wheels. But for me, the Storm 2 is a better looking wheel, and also they've discontinued them, so I don't want to say they're rare, but you don't see them very often at all on Miatas. For the most part, they're great. This one on the passenger side here has got a little bit of road rash. That came with it. That wasn't me, but otherwise it's fine. One of these days maybe I'll fix it. And I have them wrapped with some Falken RT660s. Great tire for autocross for sure. All right, other things that were done to the car. The roll bar that you see there is a hard dog roll bar. I put that in. I didn't record that because it was a pain in the butt, and I really wasn't super into recording at the time. But I digress. The roll bar that came in it was something, it was unbranded. I don't know what it was. It set a lot lower and a lot farther back, and it was ugly as sin. So the interior was the typical black and tan style interior, but it was disgusting. But the roll bar itself had a tan leather wrapped padding on it, and it was gross looking. So I pulled that off and spray painted the bar black, and it was fine for a while. And then eventually I sold it so I could upgrade to this bar. Another thing that he had done to it was the steering wheel setup. So the steering wheel that's in there now I put in, but it had a smaller diameter Momo sport wheel, and it was nice, but it was smaller in diameter, and I didn't like it as much, and so I ended up changing it out. But the point is that he had already gotten rid of the factory wheel airbag and converted it to with the wheel hub on there. So that was already all done for me. The only other thing, so it had an aftermarket exhaust on it that he had put on, and quite frankly, the exhaust was horrendous. I don't know what the point of the exhaust was really, because it had no muffler, it had a very terrible resonator on it, and the exhaust came out right by the axle, and so you could smell exhaust the entire time when you're driving. It was horrible, it was loud. I ended up swapping that out at one point for an ISR sport exhaust, race exhaust. I'm not sure what. I'll put a link in there, but in the description. But it was it was fine. I ran it for about a year, but it droned pretty bad on the highway, and I ended up just driving me crazy. So I ended up getting rid of it and swapping it out for what I have on there now, which is a Flyin Miata setup from the kind of downpipe area all the way back. So it's their mid pipe with their high flow MagnaFlow cat, and then their exhaust, their muffler, I mean, and it sounds great. I love the sound of this exhaust, especially compared with the header that I have on there, which I'll go over in a second when I get in the engine bay. But this car sounds really good. It doesn't drone at all. It's fairly calm sounding, but when you're actually on full throttle, you can hear the exhaust and you can hear the intake. So it's a complete oral experience, and it sounds phenomenal. I've had a lot of compliments on the car, inside and outside, that it sounds good. So I love the setup as it is now. As for seats, I put these in. I'll go over them in a second, but he also included, for a pretty reasonable price, some sporty bucket seats. They were okay. You can actually see them in the top of the YouTube channel. If you go to look at the top, there's a picture of me up there in the car with some red seats in the background that I'm sitting in, I should say. Those were the ones that were in there. I just ultimately could not get them low enough for me to be safe in the car, especially on track. So I ended up selling those and going and finding these. These are Sparco Rev 2. You can see they're GRP Light Boss, I guess is what it says. I don't know. They're actually discontinued. They're a great seat. They're a little wider than what a lot of people run, and that's because I wanted to have easy ingress and egress in and out of the car, because I was kind of daily driving it for a while, and so I wanted sport style race seats, but not super aggressive, super high bolstered. So the tubular design of like a Sparco Sprint, very high in the thighs, tough to get in and out of. These are fiberglass, and so this is pretty easier to get in and out of. You can see there's a little bit of fabric loose here. That's because I had to trim some of the seats right here to fit with the roll bar, and so the padding is just kind of stuck up there. It's solid as can be, but it's not rubbing the roll bar right here. And same with right here on the side. I had to trim a little bit out right here to fit around the door cards. You can see over there it fits nice and snug. So they are in here for sure, but it's a tight squeeze. And I did have to hammer the transmission tunnel just a little bit to get them in. Most people do with a Miata anyway, because it's so freaking tiny. While we're in here, I guess I'll go over the interior. As I said, this was a black on top, tan on bottom type car. The door cards were tan and black and tan. And the tan was disgusting. I tried to clean it. It was gross. I ended up ripping all of it out. You can tell actually from the top that it was tan too. I ended up ripping all that out, including the dash, and replaced it with an NB2 dash and a black carpet set and an NB2 center console. It's a direct fit. It's nice, and it has better cup holders than the NB1 style, and the NB2 style door card's a little bit nicer as well. And then, like I said, I swapped out that steering wheel for a Nardi steering wheel with, it's a bigger diameter steering wheel, and I swapped it out because with the smaller Momo wheel, I couldn't see the tops of my gauges when I'm sitting in the car. It's a flat bottom. It's upside down because I got the wheel turned, but it makes it easier to get in and out of the car, and I think it looks fantastic, and it's great feel. And of course, on the interior, you've probably seen the videos of my IRP shifter. I absolutely love that shifter. That is the best upgrade I've done with this car, hands down. I love it, love it, love it. Go check out those videos if you want to see more about that. Alpine aftermarket head unit just gets me Apple CarPlay, really. It's really nice. And of course, you can see there the, not sponsored, but quad lock style mount for my phone. I have the quad lock case. I absolutely love the quad lock system. I have one in my car, my truck, on my mountain bike, and actually I'm using it right now to record on my phone. I have a little quad lock set up here, and just makes it super easy to just turn it and mount it wherever. It's freaking great. I love it. Interior wise, roll bar. This is a hard dog roll bar. I don't remember. It's a hardcore M2 or something. I don't know. I'll put a link in the description, but love the bar. It's high enough to fit with me with my helmet and still pass the broomstick test. And the top actually closes over it as well. It definitely, encroaches on the seat just a little bit, but I love the look of it, and safety, of course, is good. And then, speaking of safety, you can see the video if you want, but I mounted an element fire extinguisher in there because local track regulations are going to change a little bit next year and require some kind of fire extinguisher to be in the car. And then some nice Roadster floor mats. I think that's it interior-wise. Oh, it came with, another thing that came with this car is these Delrin bushings with the little metal thing on the end here. That's a body rigidity thing. When you close the door, it keeps everything nice and rigid and stiff, I guess. I've never had the car without it, so I don't know what it was like before and after, but everyone says that that's like a game changer, I guess. All right. As for the list of things that I've done to it since, I've done quite a bit to it, mostly in the engine bay, so we'll start off with the outside. I put on the little duck spoiler, whatever you want to call it, ducktail spoiler. That is apart from D&C Performance. It's a company out of Greece that I found on Etsy. I don't know. It looks fantastic. It's something that I've not seen on any other Miata. It's also, I did an install video, you can go watch that, but I wanted something that was kind of functional, more so than kind of the factory spoiler that goes on these, but also I didn't want one of those giant wings that go up here, that are actually functional, because this is not full-on race car spec like a lot of cars are. And so I wanted something kind of in between, and I think it looks fantastic. I also, as far as Aero is concerned, I put on this front lip. It's a GV style, so Garage Very is the Japanese company that someone knocked off. So this is like a $70 eBay find. It's not great. The paint did not hold up. As you can see, the paint's coming off. This, like I said, this is a project car. This is not a show car. One of these days I do want to rip it off and repair it though, because for one, I want the paint to not be crappy, but two, I couldn't get the 3M tape to stick very well, and so it's kind of, we'll call it a Sigma build. That's what we'll call it. It looks okay from a distance, but it kind of completes the look of the car, I think. But I definitely need to adhere it a lot better. All right, let's pop the hood. Under the hood, things that have been done in here. So first of all, the radiator is aftermarket. I think it's a Flyin Miata kit, actually, with the dual electric fans, which are awesome. I've never had any cooling problems with this car ever. That is one of the upgrades that came on the car that the guy did right. And I love that upgrade. Like I said, I've never had any temperature problems with this car. Not that they typically overheat, but most people with the stock radiator, it gets crappy over time, like most of the stuff does that are kind of plasticky. Those of you that know what you're looking at, you'll see a giant glaring hole right here. Normally the air box sits right here, and I took that off and ended up going this kind of shorty style cone filter, pod filter style. It's just for sound. I mean, it sounds great when you give it a little blip with the throttle, or when you're just on throttle, you can hear that intake growl. It doesn't help. It doesn't help horsepower. Maybe even hurts it a little bit. I don't know, but I like it for the sound. So like I said, though, so the NB1s, which is what this is, and this is a BP4W, the exhaust manifold is an actual cast iron manifold, so it doesn't flow very well. And so what you're looking at is the header off of an NB2. They went to a tubular style manifold, way better flow, and it's a direct bolt-on. And so I've swapped it out for that. And then from there down is, well, the middle piece there is a factory piece, but then after that is the Flyin Miata exhaust setup. It is still a powered steering rack. It did have a shock tower brace, but it's a strut tower brace is what it really is, and this car isn't a strut style car, and so they're kind of useless, and so I ended up taking that off. It looked really cool, but ultimately it was just in the way. Every time I did anything, I'd have to remove it first. I rerouted the washer bottle and did what's called a cappuccino reroute, which that bottle is off of a small Japanese car called a cappuccino, and it's nice and small and fits up here in the cowl. And so I rerouted that and did some bracketry up there to mount it nice and solid. Get it out of the engine bay. One of these days I'll put one of the cowl covers on there so you won't even see it. Hood struts, those are Flyin Miata hood struts. I do have a different coolant reservoir to get rid of the plasticky junk out of there. I have a Moroso catch can. These engines do have a little bit of blow-by sometimes, and so the intake manifold had some oil inside it when I went to swap it out. And so I went ahead and put the catch can on, and I swapped it out for this one. This is a JDM version intake manifold, so it doesn't have the butterfly valves that the US market one has. It is the stock block of a BP4, the stock head, but I did do a couple of changes. So for the life of the car that I've had it for the first couple of years, there was a rattle, very specific in RPM. So for like 57, 5800 RPM, I could hear a rattle. I could never track it down. So some buddies and I were actually changing the front main seal. And while we were in here, we were listening to it, and we determined that we thought it was a cam issue to where it wasn't gapped correctly, and maybe it was kind of tinking a little bit at a specific RPM. So I went ahead and bought a new set of valve springs and seals, and I decided to tear into the motor a little bit, and while I was in there, I was going to do an upgrade. So in 2004, 2005, they came out with the Mazda Speed turbo version of the Miata, and the intake cam in those cars is a more aggressive cam, but it's also a direct fit into these cars because that motor is based on the BP4W motor, because these are good motors for turboing. And so what I did was, while I had it open, I went ahead and put in that cam along with upgraded valve springs, and I replaced the valve seals. And while I was in there, I went ahead and did the valve lashing on all of the buckets. So this is a bucket and shim style on top of the valves. And there was several that were off, no question. So I got all that correct, but that was not the rattle. The rattle was actually this seal back here. There's a cap back here that goes on the exhaust side, on the exhaust cam side. That was actually loose. So that was what was rattling. So that was all fixed. And this thing runs so good for a pretty much stock motor. Again, it's not boosted, it's not turbo, it's not supercharged, nothing like that. I have the dyno results to prove that it put down 122 horsepower at the wheel. That is pretty much it for the engine bay. Other things I've done, I guess, is it has a different clutch on it. It has an exity OEM style clutch. It had the upgraded clutch from Flyin Miata. I think they call it like a half a meal clutch or something like that. It's purple. But the problem with it was, so it has the light flywheel from that package on there, which is really nice. So it is a little freer revving, if you will, than other Miatas. But that clutch, I think the guy did not do a very good job of breaking it in, and so it had hot spots all over it. It was kind of terrible, especially when the car got hot. It would shudder a lot when you try to move it. And so I swapped that out, and while I was back there, I did the rear main seal was leaking a little bit, so I replaced that and put it all back together, and it's held up great ever since. This car does have a factory Torsen limited slip differential, which has been great for tracking autocross days. All right, I'm gonna wrap it up here. One of the things I love about this car, there's a couple things. When I was younger, 15, 14, somewhere in there, my dad had a 66 Thunderbird. I helped him build that car, and I learned a lot about cars, but also, of course, spent a lot of good quality time with Dad, which was phenomenal. And so a motivator to get this car and to get the approval from the wife to get this car, or a car in general. My middle son, Sam, is into cars, and so I wanted to get a car that we could kind of do stuff together. And this has been awesome. Up there on the shelf is some helmets. One of those is his, so he goes with me to autocross days and stuff. He's only 14, so he can't go on the track yet, but one of these days he'll be right there with me, and we'll probably co-drive this car, which is super exciting and fun, and he's learned a lot, and he gets out here with me and turns a wrench too, and so it's one of those fun things. The other thing I like about this car is there are some perks to modern cars, and there are some downsides. And a lot of those perks get turned off because they are downsides when you go to do track stuff. So for instance, traction control, stability control, all those nannies that kick in, and some cars you can't turn all the way off. This car has none of those, none of them. No traction control, there's no ABS on this car even. Like, it's full manual, and it's so much fun to drive. And that, to me, it's such a driver's car. The one thing that it's lacking, even though I've done some upgrades, the one thing it's lacking, as you start to push these cars and try to do track days with them and yada, 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 the lack of horsepower becomes apparent. Some people are totally okay with that. You call them momentum cars because they are just as fast as a lot of cars on the track if you know how to drive them and you utilize that momentum to your advantage. Some tracks, though, have longer straightaways and stuff, and you just get blown away by the modern Camaros and Corvettes and such. Like my buddy Tyler has 3 or 4 times the horsepower that this car has. Can keep up with him in the corners just fine, but as soon as we get any kind of straightaway, he's gone. There's a couple ways to fix that, of course. One way is turbo. That's a very popular mod for these cars, especially this car in particular with the BP4W motor. It's a very turbo-friendly motor. I am personally, even though I said at the beginning my buddy's turbo Miata was the one that kind of got me into this, it's because of the power to weight ratio, not necessarily the turbo. I don't like, personally, the turbo feel of turbo lag and then the turbo boost kicking in. It's cool and all, but it's just not for me. Another option would be supercharging, which kind of gets rid of that. But there's just not a lot of supercharger kits for these cars for whatever reason. I actually don't know why. There's a kind of in between, which is a pro charger that you could do, which is pretty cool. That combines the belt-driven functionality of a supercharger, so the linear power delivery, but also it's a belt-driven turbo, if you will, instead of exhaust-driven turbo. And so those are pretty cool. I definitely considered that as an option. Ultimately, I wanted to stay naturally aspirated, though, and for this car, for this motor, to squeeze more horsepower out of it, I would have to go with individual throttle bodies, probably aftermarket ECU, spend thousands of dollars to get a few more horsepower. There's just not that much more horsepower that can be pulled out of these motors naturally aspirated. So the other route would be an engine swap. There's a couple of options. LS swap is popular among these, actually. But to me, I want very usable horsepower, so I don't want 500 or more horsepower in this car because it's just going to spin the wheels. So what I did was I actually went this route. And as you can see, we've already started tearing this down. And I'm not going to go into detail, but if you know what this is, now would be the time to subscribe. More to come on that. That's my car. I want to know what you think about the car and the build. I've had people ask me to do this build overview in the past, and I put it off because I knew that I wanted to do an engine swap at some point, and now that I have the engine I'm going to swap into it, I thought now would be a great time to say, here's the car as it sits. It's, as of this recording, it's October. The winter months are coming, so this will be a winter project. The excitement on my son's face when the engine arrived and I started talking about this project and this process has made it worth getting everything set up. And you can see there's a pile of parts and boxes down there from K-Power Industries, K Miata. And we could not be more excited. He's been out here with me. You'll see him in the videos actually going forward on this project, and it's going to be exciting. Subscribe. See you in the comment section. See you soon.